Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Hi, we're Siri, Johansson and Shivanjali Tomar from Umea Institute of Design, Sweden. And we're here to present a project, Lango, which is a service for one of the consequences of globalization and something that most of us in this room must have faced at some point in our lives. We're going to start off by showing a video which gives a peek into the problems of language learning and some of the other issues surrounding it.
In today's globalised world, an increasing number of people are moving across the globe, some for short durations and others to stay for the rest of their lives. Being born in another country than your parents and growing up in a multilingual environment is becoming a natural situation for many kids born in this generation. Whatever the reasons are for moving, it's easy to get caught in a negative loop where the lack of language proficiency represses you from taking an active part in the new society, and the absence of cultural participation slows down the process of learning the new language. Children often learn a new language and integrate faster, which can be frustrating for the parents. At the same time, it is hard for them to keep their mother tongues actively in use in the family. So how can we make knowledge sharing within the family easier and make language learning an integral part of everyday life?
Of ethnographic studies and interviews with users, we constructed this model to describe a family's different spaces of language learning, basically. So what you have here is a family with parents, the child, the grandparents. At the bottom you have the daycare or school, and surrounding one of the adults you have the activities outside the home that engages this individual. So the first space of the language service is that of family co-learning of multiple languages. So we have the child learning from his or her parents and grandparents, and the parents in their turn learning from their child. This is Stoffel, who's Dutch. He has an Italian wife, and a couple of years back they moved to Sweden. And here their daughter was born. And between the two of them, they speak English, but their daughter started going to daycare, Swedish daycare, where she picks up Swedish. So between the three of them, they have 4 languages going in their little family. So the question for us was really how all the languages spoken in a family such as Stoffel's could be maintained, and also how we can use the fact that kids pick up languages quickly, like Stoffel's daughter picks up Swedish really fast, how we can use this fact to help Stoffel learn Swedish.
The second space of a model was about sharing of knowledge within the family, specifically while learning Swedish. The biggest problem is that parents today can't have dedicated time to learn a new language, while in the family, also parents and children learn different attributes of a language. Like in Naima's case, she's a refugee in Sweden. Her mother is really good at Swedish grammar, but the kids, Naima and her siblings, are really good at pronunciation of Swedish words. So that left us wondering as to how we can use family members to learn from each other and support each other from one's lived experiences.
The third and last space is that of contextual learning. Contextual meaning learning through interaction with native speakers and in real-life situations. So we organized this workshop where we had our potential users sketch out their own personal language scapes. And what many of them realized during this exercise was that they actually have plenty of opportunities in their everyday life to practice Swedish, but yet it doesn't happen once they leave the classroom. So this left us wondering as to how could we support and encourage people to speak up and kind of try to use Swedish, although they don't feel completely comfortable doing it. So our project has really been based on these 3 spaces that we got out of our ethnographic studies. And we looked into a couple of other aspects as well. So on the technology side, we ventured into speech recognition because we recognize that this field could have a large potential power in the field of language learning. On the social side, we looked at quantification of self, which is a very trendy area at the moment. But we saw how this, we wanted to try to look at how this could be expanded. We currently have a lot of applications that track our physical performance and use this data to help us achieve better. So we figured that this type of motivation should be possible to provide for the intellect just as well as we provide it for the body today.
So concluding our ethnographic and secondary research, what we wanted our service to actually do was to provide learning with family members for support and motivation. We wanted it to provide contextual learning that was relevant and timely, and we wanted the learning to be more visual and actionable. So based on these principles, we designed a service which uses speech recognition to gather data on what languages you're using and what new words you're adding to your vocabulary. And that gathered data is then formulated into different outputs on different platforms for family members. Moving on, we would briefly like to mention the philosophy behind the graphical language. We broke down the speech bubble and used the bottom triangle as a metaphor for what is needed to start talking in a new tongue. We were also quite excited by the fact that we can use these small building blocks to construct something as complex as a language. Also, each language that you see in the system is depicted by a specific color of its own. It makes the data and statistics more visual and more understandable to the user. Now, we'd briefly like to go further into some of the key touch points of the service. To start with, when you sign up for the service, you get this wristband which recognizes the words that are spoken by the person it's calibrated to. It recognizes words only when you speak them, so it makes speaking this new language an essential component to the service. Moving on to the family co-learning space, these are the audiovisual messages that every parent receives every time your kid says a new word. You get these messages in the kid's voice, so it generates a lot of curiosity in parents in trying to understand what this word means. So they're prompted to speak to the native speakers around them in their workplace or in their colleges, to not just know the literal meaning of the word, but also understand the cultural connotations. Moving on, we developed a plugin for Skype, since it's one of the most widely used tools today to stay in touch with your parents back home. So this plugin, when activated, creates this virtual layer over Skype, so that when kids says a new word in a foreign language, the grandparents can understand what that word means. And also it provides a very good interface for the grandparents to try to teach the kid in their own native languages.
Throughout this project, we've seen that learning in context is very powerful as opposed to learning in the classroom. These are the location bits that propose phrases based on your whereabouts, and thus they prompt immediate use of these phrases. So it's meant to help you get over the threshold of using these phrases and talk to people in the spaces that you visit. This is the language progress chart, which visualizes your progress over time and different locations. And you can also compare how you're doing to the results of your family members. So our hope here is that this can motivate you both to learn more yourself, but also to help others and teach others. What you've seen here are really the key touch points from these three areas that the language service is made up of.
Now, to tie up these different concepts and put them into context, we'd like to run you through one of our users' experience with the service.
Hi, I'm Jasjeet. I moved to Sweden 2 years back with my wife, and we had our daughter Rehet here. Till now, me and my wife managed to get past without learning much Swedish, but things are changing. We have been using Lango for the past couple of months. It tracks our language use and helps us learn from each other and along with Rehet. Every time Rehet learns and speaks a new word in her daycare, we get a message with her saying that word. Listening to her makes me curious, and I often resort to talking to my colleagues. Talking to them helps me understand more about the social meaning of the word, which is quite different from what I find out through the dictionary, helping me learn a bit more about the Swedish culture each time. Lango is motivating me to use Swedish when interacting with people in everyday life. Last time I visited the stadium website, I learned how to ask for my right size with different colors in Swedish. It helped me get over the threshold of using these lines with the saleswoman in the store. Since I was prepared, I could ask for the blue shirt in size 48, all in Swedish. Depending on where I am, Lango suggests me new sentences to use. I challenge myself to use them as soon as I get a chance. It gives me a boost of confidence every time I manage to say something in Swedish and have someone answer back. Lango sets challenges based on my wife's progress. Going to a place where my wife has been so fluent in her Swedish gives me a push to talk in Swedish as well. Communicating with the daycare has become much richer now. Knowing what new words Rehet learned during the day also creates interesting conversations between us parents and the staff. We often play word games with Rehet, where she says a word in one language and I will translate it to another. We want her to be confident using Swedish and our native languages. One way of doing that is by using Lango over Skype when we talk to Rehet's grandparents. When Rehet uses a new word, illustrations pop up and her grandparents can add translations. The pictures create a playful interaction between them. Lango has become an important tool for keeping her Hindi and Punjabi at a good level. All words that Rehet learns are added to her vocabulary book. I find it easier to learn when I can talk to her about the Swedish words. Me and my wife compare it to our respective mother tongues and teach Rehet while we are learning Swedish ourselves. This language is becoming an important part of our world, and I know I need to keep up if I want to fully understand that world myself.
That's from us. Thank you.
How about a question from the audience, and then we'll go quickly to you guys. Anybody have a question? Oh, by the way, we're streaming this live, and it's being broadcast, so if you don't want to appear, don't ask a question. That is really encouraging. All right, back to you guys.
Hey, that was great. I mean, and it was beautiful, and it was well articulated. The question I have is, I love the idea of learning language in context. I think that that's brilliant. I'm wondering how, or if you've given any thought to how the system takes into account what I think of when I hear language in context, which is colloquialisms, which can be geographical, demographic. There can be a number of ways that colloquialisms come up, and how you account for that in the system, and if you've made any sort of you've made any if you've built the system to accommodate that, and how it accommodates that, and how you track colloquialisms across all of those different variables.
You wanna? Yeah. So one thought was that what you saw in some of the touch points where the system is proposing some statements or phrases that you should use in a certain geographical location. We thought that it should happen with the crowdsourced data. Like, the system knows what kind of words, what kind of phrases people are using in that area, and those get pushed out to you when you're using this service. So that was the whole idea, because we know that the kind of language that you study in schools and the kind of language that's spoken out on the streets is very different. And what is on the streets is far more useful to you than reading a grammar book at home. So that was the whole idea.
Great, thanks.
So two quick things. And so first of all, I think you did an excellent job of presenting your idea, working through in a detailed level. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And at the same time, the system was never built, correct?
No.
Okay. So just a quick comment. You're using a visual language of documentary style and cinematic that reflects what you see in the news in terms of the last video. I'm not sure you're aware of it, but you introduced and said one of our users' experience in using the system. Of course, there was no such user, and they didn't use the system. But and even though I know that intellectually, emotionally, everything else, it's in the language of not a sketch, it's not roughed, it's not stylized, it's in the language of documentary. And you have to be very careful about the usage of media. And so I would have preferred you to say it captures the experience of our system, that the system that we're shooting for, if it was implemented the way we hoped, right? But the language you used, coupled with that, gives an impression that loses a certain amount of integrity. And I think it's be very careful about that. And it's so, but I'm not criticizing. It was beautifully done in the language. I think it was just the wrong language for what you were doing. And the second thing was, just quickly, on your ethnographics, you did some really nice work to identify the problem, and then you came up with a solution. Did you, at the same time, find some adults who were trilingual, who were the product of such a family, and asked them what was it in their life that helped them get that excellence, and then work backwards from that and try and implement that, institutionalize that in terms of the design? And I'm curious if you did both sides, because that didn't come out in the talk.
Right. We did interviews with, you could say, people who were in various stages, so to speak. So recent immigrants, people from both the groups of expats who had moved to Sweden voluntarily and people who had come as refugees. And we also talked to people who had grown up in Sweden with parents who had been recent immigrants when they'd been born. So we talked to Veronica, for example, whose parents were Croatian, but she's grown up in Sweden. So what she's trying to do is maintain her Croatian and her tie to that culture. So we had those discussions, and it's what struck us the most, I think, was that it was often not so much about language in itself, but more about preserving the link to the culture, to the kind of popular music that people listen to in Croatia, for example, at the moment, the kind of slang that is used on the street right now, how to keep that link to the parents' country. Not so much, the language is the vessel there, but it's not the goal. So, yeah. So, I don't know if it answered your question, but we had a lot of interesting discussions around that topic.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks again for the presentation.
Thanks.
I'll be very quick. Yeah, that was lovely. I thought it was very of its moment, both socio-politically and technologically, which is important to come from both sides. The only thing, that, just in the interest of time, that I thought you could... There's a couple of thoughts or insights inside your presentation and work that you could make much more salient, I feel, which would make it really strong, which is that there's a huge emotional component to what you're talking about, not simply a linguistic or a learning one. And you mentioned it kind of in a couple of places about the confidence boost being the driver for behavior, which is really important. But I think the huge thing is, like, families that are sort of polyglot, they're kind of divided by language, right? And you make that point in your fractured language-scape thought, which is really interesting to me. But I think that the solution you provided is really powerful, and you didn't make enough of it in some ways, which is that parents and grandparents are infinitely fascinated by every single thing children do. And it provides this really amazing ability to make these people all learn the language together, because every single word, to your point in the video, is interesting to them. So it's a hugely powerful idea, in my opinion, but I think you could have just dialed that little bit up. But otherwise, it was lovely, really lovely. So thanks.
Thank you for doing it for us.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.